What's going on, people? In today's video we are going to be taking a look at some of my favourite trappy lines in chess, including some checkmate, some winning of queens, and some just really good lines you should definitely revise and go over at least once a week or as often as you like. I recommend once a week though, to stay on top and completely know them, and if you've got any more to add then feel free to add them. I will be sharing this study at the end of this video, so you'll be able to download it, and if it's not in the description through while we're going through together, you can look at the moves as I speak about them. So anyway, let us get into the first line. This is Legal's mate, and it starts after e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and bishop to c4. Now this is where the opponent normally just develops. They've blocked in their light square bishop, not opting to go for the Italian. This usually happens at lower ratings, and this is where we play the knight c3 move. The opponent comes to threaten our knight on g4, and usually they've been told not to take the bishop, not to trade off the bishop for the knight, especially for no reason, and it's usually to damage pawn structure or things like that. So we automatically play the move h3. Now they've been taught not to take the knight for the bishop because it's the bishop's more valuable, so they drop back, and this is where we begin the Legal's trap. We take the pawn on, we take the pawn on e5. Our queen is hanging. Now the opponent isn't blind, they are not stupid. They didn't want to take the knight because it's not worth it, but they will take the queen. However, this is a blunder, as we can see by the two marks on the bishop as it's taken the queen. We play bishop takes f7 check. Bishop takes f7 check, and the king cannot recapture because it is protected by the knight. So the king must walk to the dangerous square, and ultimately, as the king comes up, it falls into checkmate. This is Legal's mate. It's not Legal's mate, and it's not called Legal's mate. It was played by a chess player with the surname Legal, and that is henceforth why it is called Legal's mate. He calculated all of this from this position. He calculated knight to here. Obviously, they're going to take the queen. Then bishop takes f7. King has to come up, and this is checkmate. He calculated all of this without chess engines. He did this on his own, with his own pawns and queens and knights on a chessboard, without computers, which is really impressive when you think about it. But yes, this is ultimately one of my favourite traps to play at the lower ratings. It works a charm, and you will get many people with it. Now on to the second trap. We have the Blackburn Shilling Gambit. Oh, by the way, just a sideline in this Legal's trap, mate, is if the knight takes here and the knight takes here, then we take the bishop here, but then you're saying, hold on, isn't this just a free piece? Well, if they take here, then we have queen to b5 check, winning back the knight. So no matter what the queen blocks, we win the knight. If the king moves, so it's recommending this move, we win the knight. It's still winning for white. So don't worry, this is all theory. And we can get rid of this line from here. We don't need this line. Brilliant. On to the next chapter. The Blackburn Shilling Gambit. So what is the Blackburn Shilling Gambit? e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6. Then we play bishop to c4, and the opponent plays knight to d4. We take the pawn and the queen comes to g5. Now, we take this pawn on f7 because it's anchored down by our bishop. And the queen takes on g2. Now, we play rook to f1 because we're hanging a rook. And the queen comes to e4. Now, we block with the bishop because if we block with the queen, then it gets taken. And the amazing move, knight to f3, wins the game on the spot. It is a smothered checkmate because of the pin. The pin cannot take. So, because of the pin, it is smothered checkmate, which I find absolutely beautiful. And I am still yet to get people with this trap. I'm still yet to memorize this trap. It's a really tricky trap to remember. Just such a brilliant trap, especially after the fact they have to give the knight up too, and if they're a low-leveled opponent, they might not see all this, and it'll be a very hard line for them. Which takes us onto a sideline of the Blackburn Shilling Gambit. So we get the same position. However, when the queen comes to here, and we play knight takes f7, the queen takes g2, sorry, and we take the rook. Now, this is essentially a rook trade. However, when the queen takes, we cannot go because the knight is anchored on d4. It's covering this square, unfortunately. So, we have to play bishop to f1. It's the only move in the position. Then the queen takes e4, sorry. Bishop to e2. We get knight, sorry, I'm getting all the pieces mixed up here. We get bishop to c5, and then knight out the queen. Queen goes, oh, sorry, my bad. Knight to knight to f3 check again. King goes to f1. Then we play queen to h4, and as you can see, I've marked out all the different moves. There's just far too many moves in red. All the colour coordinated moves are what could be played together. There's no way of stopping checkmate on f2. If the red, say for example, the bishop takes the knight, queen f2 checkmate. If queen goes to e1, trying to defend the checkmate, then knight takes e1. And if the knight goes to f4, trying to cover the f2 square, then it's just simply queen takes e4, sorry. So, of course, the king has to come up. It's the only move in the position, and it still loses. We still take the pawn, f2. The king has to come up. It has no other squares to go. Well, it could go to e1, but that's just checkmate still. So it goes up, and we win with a pawn move. Pawn to d6, checkmate. The king is completely cut off. All the squares around the king are butchered, and it is trapped. A beautiful trap I am yet to get people with, but nonetheless, the Blackburn Shilling Gambit is on my study list. Now let's go to the Elephant's Gambit. Let me just delete all these lines, sorry. Otherwise I'll go back onto my lines and they'll just be all the way through, and there's nothing worse. Elephant's Gambit, Queen's Gambit, declined line. So, here we have the Queen's Gambit declined. In this position you play knight to c3, then you get knight to f6, bishop g5, and knight bd7. This is all common theory. However, the Elephant's Gambit starts when black takes this pawn. When white takes the black pawn. Now, we take the pawn because they're pinned to the queen. Knight takes anyway. We take the queen. And the devastational bishop to b4 by black leaves the king with no squares but to block with the queen, winning back the queen. And this is one of the best lines that black can play, because we are ultimately up, as you can see, 2 points up here. Such a beautiful line. I have not played it yet. Now let's get on to the Lasker's Trap. Lasker's Trap, we play d4. So it's a different, apart from the Queen's Gambit declined and the Elephant's Gambit, we have d4. This is another Queen's Gambit declined. However, this is the Albin counter gambit. Another very popular move against d4. If you are a London player and you want to mix up your repertoire or include a few extra lines, I would definitely recommend the Elephant's Gambit and the Lasker Trap. Just a lot of Queen Gambit theory in general, to be honest, but the Lasker Gambit and the Elephant's Gambit are definitely moves to have in your repertoire, your opening repertoire as a d4 player. Anyway, we get d4, d5, c4, e5. This is the Albin counter gambit. Now we take the e5 pawn, you know, it's a free pawn, so white says. And black pushes the d5 pawn to d4. We get e3, bishop b4 check. And then we block with the bishop. They take on e3. We take the bishop. And there goes the queen. So we have two moves in this position. We have king e7. If we play king e7, that loses to bishop g4 check. It loses the queen. And if you play king takes f2, then that just loses even quicker to queen takes d1. So this is a very tricky, trappy line. Oh, there's the intermezzo too. So if we play this straight away, then we have to take the king. But because we control this file and we control this square here, we can play the tricky move knight and the king move here or here, but it's just terrible position for for white, sorry. If the rook takes, then there's this tricky move winning the queen. Well, you could even play queen takes and I think it's checkmate. Yeah, no, not checkmate, but you know, you've lost the queen. It's a pretty much resignable position. I just need to figure out where my line stops here. But anyway, this is a very tricky and trappy line. As you can see, there's many moves. You can't take the pawn. You can't go here. So yeah, very trappy line. Very beautiful trappy line. The Albin counter gambit in the Lasker Trap. Then we have the Lizard gambit. Lizard. I don't know if it's lizard or lizard or... However, this one starts with the Reti. Well, I'm not sure if or what this move is called specifically, but we have essentially a Queen's Gambit declined transpose. And it changes into the Albin counter gambit, but we've played knight f3 and knight c6. Now we take back with the knight in the Lizard gambit. The knight takes, and we take with the pawn, because, you know, white thinks this is a free pawn. And again, we get a similar move order from the Lasker Trap. We get d4 with the black pawn, pushing into our position. White plays e3, and we play the semi-confusing, you know, it's a dubious move, because With perfect play here, we can just equalise. But he plays bishop to d2. Black takes the pawn. White takes the bishop, which is a blunder, as we can now see from this move that we've just seen previously. White has to move, and then we get the bishop check. So, that is the Lizard Gambit. Now on to one of my favourite lines, and I've won many games with this line. This is the England Gambit, and I love to play this line against so if you get e4, d5, I'm just unsure why this move was played, but there's many ways you can do this. I always just go... How do I play this? e4, d5, knight f3. I normally play. I don't know why the move order's different here. I normally do this. e4, d5, knight f3, and I just pre-move this sometimes, because if I get this move, then I don't mind playing into this line. I don't know why this is different, but anyway, we'll go with this. e4, d5, pawn to g3, knight take, pawn takes, then we get knight c3, knight f6, defending the pawn, queen out, and they try to defend with the bishop, and of course we've got this check here, threatening to win back this pawn if the bishop blocks, or threatening to win the bishop if they don't notice. As a famous streamer would call this is the classic right triangle. So we check, bishop comes back and we win the pawn, bishop goes to c6, threatening the queen, because of course it looks like we're going to take the rook, and we have the brilliant now defensive move, bishop to b5, pinning the bishop to the king, so the bishop cannot take your pawn, your queen. So then we get queen up. This wins the queen, because if knight takes, then we take the rook with check. As like I say, I've won many games with this. The queen is trapped. It cannot go to the... So, like, the opponent thinks, oh, I can take my opponent's silly. But then we play queen c8, checkmate. Brilliant move, winning the game. Checkmate, the king has no squares to go to, and there's no resources of blocking. So, that is the England Gambit. Now let's go on to the next chapter, the fishing pole trap. In the fishing pole trap, we get e4, e5, knight f3, and knight c6. Now, bishop to b5, knight f6, and castles. This is one of the lines that is really winning straight out of the end of the line. However, I'm pretty sure, I forgot to check to be fair, but I'm pretty sure the win rate against the fishing pole trap is probably above 70%. If you're not winning this position and you are on a rating increase, then it's a very dire situation. So we get castles, going for something like the Berlin endgame. I'm not sure, sorry, no, that's wrong. However, we get knight g4. When the opponent plays h3, we play h5, counter-attacking the knight that's going to be taken. So we give up the knight and take back with the h file, and as you can see by the arrows that I've drew, it is pretty unstoppable for white to get a checkmate on this square, or this square. As when the queen comes to f6 and then moves over to h6, unless the the opponent's got many resources. You can't play queen to here because the knight takes. So what you have to do is first play something like knight d4, attacking the bishop and the knight. Knight has to take, then you can play this move. It's very confusing, but there's many different lines here. I can draw them out in different colours so it makes a bit more sense. We've got knight to here, knight takes, queen here. Or we've got pawn takes, queen here, queen here. There's a few lines to go down, but it's, as you can see, there's an open H file for the rook and the queen. If needs be, you can move your queen to here and play the longest line possible. This is going to be ultimately checkmate in the end. So there's many, many, many ways to win this position. Many, many ways. However, that takes us on to our next line, the Budapest Gambit. So we get d4, and f6, c4, and e5. This is the start of the Budapest Gambit. Now, we take the pawn on e5, and the knight moves to g4, threatening the pawn. So we play knight f3, defending the pawn. This is where black plays d6, giving up yet another pawn. So we think this is a nice free pawn. E takes d6, bishop takes d6, and now we play h3, kicking this knight out of the position. Knight takes f2, king takes f2, and we now realise that black is losing their queen to a revealed tactic. As the bishop has moved, it has opened up the eyes to the queen. And black cannot go back to the e1 square because it is covered by the bishop's check. So this is an ultimately brilliant move, sacrificing the bishop for a lead in initiative, winning the opponent's queen. Beautiful tactic, if you ask me. Now, this is one of the favourite lines and is quite late on this list, but I will definitely be studying this line a lot more. If anybody is a Sicilian player, sorry, this is not the Sicilian line, my bad. That is the Siberian trap, which used to be number 10. This is the King Burger checkmate. Now, I forgot the name of the person that came up with this checkmate. However, this is a beautiful line, a very beautiful line. We're taught never to go f4 because it weakens the king. However, this was the second move of this game. Now, the opponent took the pawn on f4 with haste as immediately as it was played, and knight f3 to block the pawn in its tracks and stop any queen checks, preventing this here or here. It's very difficult because if the queen comes to here and the knight's not here, say for example in this position, if you play d3, sorry, then the queen comes to here, then you have to block, and this takes, and you get your rook taken, or it gets very messy anyway. So knight blocks the pawn from moving forwards and prevents the queen to h4 check. Now the opponent goes to f5. Now this is now the top engine move and also the most played move, because the opponent knows the pawn's going to move, it's going to be attacked. So this is just simply reassuring the position, shall we say. Knight goes to c3, pawn pushes to g4. Knight jumps out attacking the pawn twice, and black says, I don't care about the pawn, I am checking you. The opponent blocks, but now we can take. The opponent counter-attacks with queen to g4, and the brilliant move sacrificing the queen with an initiative, winning back a rook in the process. Brilliant moves. So, queen g4, pawn to g2 check from the queen. Opponent sacks the queen to take the rook and get another queen. Opponent plays queen to white plays queen to h5, threatening checkmate in 1. After this, well, it's not checkmate in 1 actually, but oh, it would. It's not checkmate. The opponent plays queen h5. The opponent tries to block, and we take with the knight. Would it be checkmate? Oh yes, it would be checkmate. I'm so sorry. It would be checkmate. So the opponent brings out the bishop, trying to free up the squares for the king. However, we play knight takes f3 instead. Knight takes f7. Now, we are attacking the rook here, but we have the brilliant move, knight to c6, knight to d6, double check. Now the king has to move. And if the king moves here, it's just checkmate. So the king moves to d8. And when the king goes to d8, we have the absolutely amazing move. Now we could play here and win the rook, queen, and this is just all too much to calculate. You should remember, queen e8 check, sacrificing the queen for a beautiful tactic, smothered mate. This is a line that caught my attention. The king burger checkmate. This is a beautiful line, and this should be definitely one that you study. If you catch your opponents with this, you might even get your chess.com account banned. This is a beautiful line, which takes us on to our next line, Noah's Ark. So in this position, we get e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop to c5. Now, Noah's Ark, for anyone that is unfamiliar, will essentially win us a bishop. So we play pawn to a6. The bishop drops back to a4, and we play pawn to b5. Sorry, we play d6. The idea is, after d4, we can take the advantage by playing pawn b5, chasing the bishop back. We take with the knight, threatening the bishop. So the knight takes, we take with the pawn. Now the queen takes the pawn. Now this is the mistake. This pawn is not free. You should not take this pawn just yet, because we have the brilliant move, pawn to c5, attacking the queen and then trapping the bishop. So the queen has to move, and it has no checking. It has no checking squares from this position. This square ultimately loses to the pawn, so it has no checking squares in this position. And we play the move bishop e6 in this position to stop any losses of the rook. We went here, the queen could take the rook. So we play bishop c6, e6, sorry, defending the rook and attacking the queen. The queen comes here with check, and then we play bishop d2, bishop d7, sorry, attacking the queen again. So it has to move for one more time, and now we can play the brilliant move, pawn to c4, ultimately trapping this bishop. It has no more squares to go to, and you will end up one bishop up in this trap. Now, on to my final and last move that I talked about previously in move 10 by accident. This is the Siberian trap, and this we're going to be studying a lot more. This comes out of the Sicilian, and it comes out of the open Sicilian. Specifically the Smith-Morra Gambit. a line that I have recently been introduced to. Pardon me. So after we get knight f3, knight c6, knight f3, e6, bishop c4, and queen to c7, we castle. This is the only move that's not one of the engine's top 3 choices, but it still maintains equality. Castles, knight f6, queen e2, and knight g4, setting up this checkmate with ideas of knight to here, I'm presuming. We play pawn to g2, and this is where the black's tactics start to reign. We get knight to d4, because if this knight takes, it's checkmate. And if we take this pawn, if we take the knight, sorry, let's just go through this line. We win the queen. So if you take the knight, the queen's hanging. And if you take the other knight, the queen, it hangs checkmate. So this is the Siberian trap out of the Smith-Morra Sicilian. It's a very tricky line, and it's why you should never put your queen on e2 in the Smith-Morra. I always put my queen on c4. Sorry, c2, but it always ends up getting attacked by this move. So what you do is you take, but I can't remember how my lines go, to be honest. I'm very confused at the moment. But this is the Siberian trap out of the Sicilian, and this is definitely a line I will be studying, because I often face the Sicilian a lot, and at my rating at the moment, just below 1500 in blitz and just above 1500, just below 1600 in rapid. This is a line that I face fairly often. Now, I haven't more of that much, but this will be a line that I have in mind for my Smith-Morra opponents. If I see that queen on e2, I know light bulbs are going to be pinging in my mind to bring out the knights, put a knight on g4, put a knight on d4, and let the opponent decide how it's going to go down. Because ultimately, you win. You win the game straight away as soon as they play this move. Pawn to h3. There is simply nothing to do. Pawn to h3, knight to d4, and it is game over. So anyway, we paste in our link at the top of the screen, and we scroll down to here, and we have this button here, and right here it says clone. And if you want to use this line, press the clone button, put your details in, and save the line to your own lichess account. Open it anywhere, anytime, and study these opening lines. Get people with these traps. These are absolutely brilliant traps. Some of them are force lines, and some of them are dubious. Like I said, I have marked the dubious lines with question marks and an exclamation point. The dubious sign, the normal dubious sign. It's a question mark and an exclamation point, and it's in blue. Now, I've also shown the key moves where it's a blunder with 2 double exclamation marks. Some of them are obvious, and some of them are not so obvious, so I've marked out the not so obvious ones. But if you want to use these lines for yourself, they will be in the description. With that being said, you stay positive. I'll see you in the next episode. Peace.